Hey everyone, welcome back. It is Icon. Thank you so much for checking out another episode of Esports Analysis. Today, we are going to break down everything that happened on Saturday. We're going to look ahead to Championship Sunday. I'm going to give you all of my predictions, all the storylines, everything moving forward. So without further ado, let's go ahead. Let's take a look at the bracket that I had set up going all the way out through Saturday. We'll go back through. We'll talk about each matchup and where things might have went wrong. We'll talk about the storylines, and we will get you set and ready for what I think is going to happen come Championship Sunday. So to start here, we'll go with the very first matchup that happened on Saturday. It was the LA Guerrillas against Florida Mutineers. So it was over here in the top right, it was the winner's bracket final between LAG and Florida. Nobody probably expected this to be the matchup, but it is what it is. For this one, I did pick this one correctly, so I said Florida was going to win this. I put them through to the semifinals. LAG was down to the losers bracket finals here in Group B. Just a quick note about this one. It started off with a pretty, I don't want to say easy, but Florida definitely deserved to win that game one hard point on Gunrunner. After that, we went to the round 11. It seems like we have had a ton of round 11s in Search and Destroys this tournament, which is great. The excitement, the intensity in those round 11s, I can't get enough of them. But LAG took that. And then the domination was pretty easy for Florida. They won that by about 50. And then the Ramaza hardpoint was just a blowout, right? They won by about 150 points. And the one thing that I'll say about this matchup that has me a little bit excited for Florida, because they've shown just a couple months ago that they're a team that can win in this league. But the other thing is that Skies has been playing really well all year, right? In this matchup alone, he had a 1.23. But the difference is that Awakening came in this matchup, he had a 1.37 overall. So his hard point was a 1.5, his SND was a 1.4, and his Dom was a 1.13. But if Awakening can be that player for Florida, now all of a sudden they're definitely, so I know they're already a top 5 team in terms of standings, but if they can continue to play like this, I think this is what people have been expecting from Florida, and I'm excited to see what they do in the finals moving forward. So Florida moved on to the semifinals. LAG moved down to the losers bracket final in Group B. After that, we moved over to the left-hand side. We did this matchup between Atlanta and Dallas, and I picked Dallas to win this, and it started off that way, right? In terms of the Gunrunner search and or the Gunrunner hardpoint, they won that 250 to 139. You just kind of figured, okay, they're I've just kind of been believing that until somebody knocks Dallas off, I'm going to keep them at my number 1 position. And as soon as they show that they can be beat, then we'll start to move things around a little bit. But they won the Gunrunner hardpoint. After that, the Ramaza Search and Destroy, they won 6-3. Then the tide started to turn a little bit, and I was a little bit shocked because they seemed like the St. Petrograd team, right? Especially what we've seen from them recently in the last couple days. But they played the domination, got beat by 50. Played the hard point on St. Petrograd, lost by almost 40. And then the Piccadilly Search and Destroy. This is the problem with playing a team like Atlanta in Search and Destroy, is that they're just so good. So if you can close out a team like Atlanta in Game 3 or in Game 4, you have to do it. Because if it's anybody, it doesn't matter what happened in the first 4 maps. When it comes down to a Game 5 Search and Destroy against Atlanta, that is super hard to win. So, unfortunately, if you're a Dallas fan, they weren't able to pull through. So, this one, we're just going to switch around a little bit. So, Dallas actually moved on to the losers bracket final, and Atlanta went through. I know things are a little jumbled at the moment, but we'll fix them. No worries. So, that's going to put Dallas into the losers bracket final here. And then, of course, we'll talk about that matchup coming up. After that, we went back across to the losers bracket semi between Chicago and Toronto. And this is the Chicago that we have been waiting for, right? This is kind of what we expected out of the entire weekend. I will say the Ramaza hardpoint was all the way down to the wire. They only ended up winning by 5. But after that, the Ramaza Search and Destroy. This is a map that Chicago struggled on a little bit previously. When they played Florida, they struggled on this Search and Destroy, but they won this 6-2, and then they won the Gunrunner Dom by 40. And if you're looking at overall KDs, Envoy had a 1.2, great. Formal had a 1.65. If Formal's doing that, most of the time, you probably think Chicago's going to win. Pristini had a 1.1 and Scump had a 1.3. But the two biggest things here, RC's was negative. RC's had a 0.98, but that's not going to, if one person from Chicago goes just a little bit sub 1, that's not that big of a deal. But the two biggest things for me is that Formal having a 1.65 KD, that is massive for them from the main AR position. And the next biggest thing is Pristini. If Pristini, with how fast he plays and how many interactions he ends up getting around the map, especially in like search and destroy, if he's able to get like that 1.1, 1.2, even a 1.0, that's massive for Chicago as a whole, because that means he's entry fragging, he's opening up lanes, he's getting map control. So that's really big for Chicago as a whole. If he doesn't have a good series, that's where things might begin to struggle a little bit, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this one we predicted. So Toronto went 0-2 for the tournament. They went home. Chicago went ahead and advanced. After that, the next matchup here was back on the other side. We had Minnesota versus Seattle, and this one, I feel for Minnesota a little bit. So obviously Alex couldn't play. He had an injury. He couldn't go on. He couldn't play. And if you look at kind of what Saint said on Twitter a little bit, in the weeks leading up to this tournament, he said that it was some of the best practice that they've had the entire year. They were firing on all cylinders. They were playing, like I said, the best that they've played, and he just couldn't go. And sometimes that happens, and it stinks. I feel terrible for him. They came out on the Azir Cave hardpoint, won that by like 35, won the Arklov Peak Search and Destroy. And then after that, it just kind of went downhill. The Gunrunner Dom, they lost by 10. Again, that was a pretty tight matchup. But the Hackney hardpoint, this is where not having Alex hurts a little bit for them. They lost by over 100. The St. Petrograd Search and Destroy, the Game 5, they lost 6-2. And Minnesota was out of the tournament. So it just stings. I hate when, I don't know, I hate these storylines when they practice, they're playing really well, an injury happens, he can't play, and then they end up losing. But I'm happy for Seattle because they're showing that they can turn things around a little bit. In this matchup particularly, every single player had an above 1 KD, and actually the person that led their team wasn't Octane, it was Pander. So good for them. I am happy to see them having some success, but that means back over here we can take Minnesota and put them back on the side, and we can take Seattle and move them into this final matchup here for the losers bracket. After that, we went back across, and this is where we had the losers bracket final for Group B, LAG against Chicago. And this one, I don't know. It was a good matchup, right? So to start, the Gunrunner hardpoint, Chicago won that by 60, and then the Search and Destroy. They're struggling in Search and Destroy. I think everybody could see that Chicago right now just doesn't look all that great in Search and Destroy. They lost 6-1. It was never really close at all. After that, the Hackney domination, they were able to pull it out. They won that by 20. But even that domination, even though they won by 20, it really wasn't that big of a victory, right? Coming down towards the end of that, in the last minute or so, that domination map could have went either way. Chicago just happened to clutch up, and they went up 2-1 in the series. And then the Hackney Yard hardpoint, this one was kind of tough to watch because after the first set of rotations, Chicago owned P2, they owned P5, they had a pretty nice lead. And then when we went to the second set of rotations, it was the exact opposite. Again, Hackney, P2 and P5, those are the two money hills. And LAG won P2, they won P5. And then as it went back to P1, LAG got a series of team kills. They had map control, they had control of warehouse, and they were able to win it on P1, third set of rotations. So that, I feel like, took the sails out of Chicago a little bit. And then the Gunrunner Search and Destroy, that had some moments, right, where it was close, but LAG won that 6-4. And I don't know, I just feel like what we talked about earlier with Atlanta, if somebody's going to go to a Game 5 against Atlanta, they're probably going to struggle a little bit. Whereas I feel like it's almost the opposite with Chicago. The way that they're playing in Search and Destroy right now, most people expect them to win their respawns and not do well in the search and destroys, and I just feel like that's what's coming to fruition right now. Other thing I'll say is that in this matchup, Scump and Formal absolutely carried them, right? It was T2P all the way. Even in like the search and destroy rounds, Scump was clutching up, Formal was clutching up, winning rounds basically by them two themselves. But Pristini overall had a 0.75, and that's what we talked about in their previous matchup with Toronto. If Pristini's going to have like a 1.1, things are probably going well for Chicago. If he's going to have a 0.75, probably not. If Envoy's going to have a 0.9 KD in a matchup, probably not going to go well, right? He's somebody that has to be that main slayer for Chicago. And then Arcidy's had a 0.88, and it just seems like this tournament, Arcidy's didn't have it for some reason. Whereas if you look back at the previous tournament that they won, Arcedy he was playing like a man on a mission. There were multiple matchups where he had like a 1.4 KD, and that makes a huge difference because when he shows up, same with Envoy and Pristini. I mean, they each have, that's something with Chicago's roster. Every single player has the ability to just take over a map, and when nobody does, this is what ends up happening. So with that, nobody saw this coming, but Atlanta will face LAG. I'm super happy for LAG. They've been through it, right? They've had all of their subs. Of course, they replaced Aches, and they brought the 3 young guns in, and now they've kind of made some more change with Saints coming back into the roster. Vivid has been playing super well, especially in Search and Destroy. So I'm excited to see what they can do tomorrow against Atlanta. We'll talk about that matchup here in just a second. Then finally, the last matchup for the day here was between Dallas and Seattle. And while Seattle has been having some success this tournament, there's a difference between having success against a rocker team that's not quite to full strength and stuff like that. When they came up against Dallas, they lost the Gunrunner Hardpoint by about 100. They lost the Gunrunner Search and Destroy 6-4. They lost the Hacking Domination by about 80. And that was all that she wrote, right? I mean, this really wasn't that much of a matchup at all. So that puts Empire through. So our matchups for Championship Sunday are set. We have LAG versus Atlanta to kick the day off at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then as soon as that is over, we'll go on to Florida and Dallas. So let's go ahead and let's make these predictions here. So going into Championship Sunday, this first matchup against Atlanta and LAG, I will say that Atlanta has shown over the past few events that they can lose maps, right? To start this year, a lot of people thought that they were invincible, and I don't think that too many people think that anymore. Are people picking them to lose? Not really, but they're just showing that they can drop maps. So I do think that Atlanta will end up winning this matchup, but it wouldn't shock me if LAG comes out and wins a map or two and they make it closer than everybody thinks that it will be, especially in the Search and Destroys. LAG has looked really impressive in the Search and Destroys, and it's kind of crazy that I'm even saying this, but especially kind of what we were thinking with LAG just a couple events ago, right? We were saying Seattle can't beat anybody not named LAG. And then the next event we said, well, LAG can't beat anybody except for Seattle. And now those two teams have kind of showed up a little bit. So it's crazy to even talk about LAG being in a final, but I'm happy for them. I want to see them have success. I just think that this mountain is probably a little bit too tall for them to climb, which takes us to our next matchup between Florida and Dallas. And this is a good one. This is the one matchup, if you're talking about just these semifinals, I think Atlanta will take care of business. But this one, especially with how Awakening has been playing, I'm super excited for this. I want to see if he steps up when it comes time to be in a high intensity, a high stakes semifinal match. I wish that this was on land, because then you get a better idea of, are these players for real, or they're just playing in the comfort of their own home like they've been doing for the last few months. So there's not really much pressure there, right? So that's the same issue that Dallas had early in the year with their young guns, with Illy and Shotzi, and even Hugh struggled a little bit at the beginning there. They seem to have overcome that. We'll see more once we get back to lands, hopefully next year. But in this matchup, I just think that Dallas being there, having been battle tested, winning 2 events in the past, I just think that with just their roster overall and how they've been playing, they'll probably be a little bit too much for Florida in this matchup. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to put Dallas through to the final here. If Florida gets through, they've shown that they can play right now. I get it that the roster was a little bit different, but Florida has shown in a past event win that, it's not necessarily that this stage is too big for them. I just think that the recent roster changes might hold them back a little bit. If we fast forward a couple events and they have some time to work out whatever kinks might be there with their new roster, then that's a different story. But for this one, I'm going to put Atlanta and Dallas through to the final, which this is a tough one, right? Because if you look at their series from earlier when we're going up to Group A, the winner's bracket there, this is one that you thought, okay, well, Dallas has that, right? They came out, they were up 2-0. The 2 victories that they had, the Gunrunner Hardpoint, the Ramaza Search and Destroy, they won that easily. And we just kind of figured, all right, Dallas is going to run away with this. Then the next 3 maps, they ended up losing pretty handedly to Atlanta. And if the one thing I want to point out is that Shotzi and Hugh have been playing really well against Atlanta, whereas if you look at Atlanta, basically everybody played well, right? Simp had a 1.13, Major Maniac had a 1.17, Celium had a 1.04, so Priesta had basically a 1.0. So there's a lot of room to improve in this matchup for Dallas, whereas everybody from Atlanta kind of played well. If we look at the last matchup, Clayster had a 0.94, Krim had a 0.78, and Illy had a 0.88. So will those players rise to the occasion and play a little bit better? Who knows? I mean, only time will tell. But with this one, I do think, so my prediction here is I think it's going to go the distance, and I think that is bad for Dallas. Again, we talked about this. One of the first things we said in this video is that if you're going to a map 5 against Atlanta, it's really hard to pick against them. So you have to either Dallas is going to win 3-1 or they're going to lose 3-2, right? I can't see Dallas winning that game 5, even though Dallas has been playing really well at Search and Destroy, right? It's not like they're a terrible search team. They're one of the best search teams that we have in the CDL. I just don't think that matchup in a game 5 is really good for them, especially with how young some of their players are, like Shotzi and Illy. So I have to decide, do I think Dallas is going to win 3-1 before map 5, or will it go map 5 and then I think Atlanta is going to win? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to predict that Atlanta comes out of this as your CDL Minnesota champs. I don't know. They've just shown time and time again that they can perform when it comes down to these types of matchups. And when you have Simp, when you have Celium, when you have a Beezy, I mean, these guys have proven it over and over and over again. And when it comes time to clutch up and their backs are against the wall, they just make it happen. I'm not saying that Dallas doesn't make it happen, because they absolutely do at certain points in time. But I just think Atlanta is going to be too much. I'm going to pick them to win. If Dallas ends up winning, I won't be shocked at all. Again, like we just said a couple minutes ago, if they take a 3-1 victory or a 3-0 victory, something like that, I would not be shocked whatsoever. But if it goes to that map 5, look for Atlanta to be a little bit too much to overcome. Last thing that I'll say about this tournament, for whatever reason, there seems to be a curse out there. Chicago and Atlanta, they're just never going to match up until they're in the same bracket. But it just seems like that matchup is avoiding us at all costs. I just want to see it, and it's not happening. So hopefully sometime here in the latter parts of the season, we do end up seeing that. But this is one of those videos. Comments down below. Let me know what you think. What are your predictions? What did you think from Saturday's matchups? Who do you think is going to go ahead and win on Sunday? Let me know. I love the interactions, reading what you guys have to say. If you're new around here, I break down Call of Duty professional matches every single day. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Leave a like before you head on the way. And with that, guys, thank you so much. Enjoy Championship Sunday. I will see you in tomorrow's upload.